welcome to CYC News for the 18th of October 2020 and the 8th of Baba, 1737 AM. I'm Monica Solomon. In today's headlines, Lebanon and Israel hold talks over disputed sea border despite state of war. Syria government prepares for virus second wave. New Europe restrictions imposed to fight second wave. Protests as Argentina COVID-19 cases pass 90,000. Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccine trial paused due to ill volunteer. New Zealand will not travel to England for friendly at Wembley. But first to Lebanon, where a first round of talks to settle a long-running dispute over a maritime border with Israel have been held, despite the two nations remaining formally at war. US officials mediated in the negotiations which took place at the base of a UN peacekeeping force in the Lebanese town of Nakura. Both sides insist the talks are not a sign of normalization of ties. However, an agreement would allow them to exploit potentially lucrative natural gas fields under the Mediterranean Sea. Lebanon is in dire economic trouble and is in need of additional revenue. The negotiations come less than a month after the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain agreed to establish full relations with Israel after US brokered deals. Following almost 3 years of US mediation, Lebanon and Israel agreed earlier this month to try to resolve their overlapping claims in the eastern Mediterranean. Last Wednesday's talk at the headquarters of the UN Interim Force in Lebanon were facilitated by the US Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs and the US Ambassador to Algeria. Lebanon defense sources told Reuters news agency that the meeting ended after only an hour and that both sides agreed to meet again on 28 October. Over to Syria now, where the government has set up a temporary hospital for COVID-19 patients at a Damascus sports complex in preparation for what an official said was a possible second wave. The facility at Al Fayha Stadium will operate 120 beds for people requiring oxygen but has capacity for 100 more. The Health Ministry has reported 4,774 cases of COVID-19 and 228 deaths in government-held areas since March. However, experts believe the actual figures are significantly higher. Last month, researchers in the UK estimated that only a fraction of deaths due to COVID-19 in Damascus had been reported for various reasons, including limited testing capacity. The UN warned that community transmission was widespread, as almost 90% of new cases could not be traced to a known source. Infection rates among health workers were also rising, and shortages of staff and supplies were putting even more pressure on a health system decimated by years of civil war. Health authorities in the opposition held northwest of Syria and the Kurdish-controlled northeast have separately reported the deaths of another 77 people with COVID-19 since the start of the pandemic. Heading over to Europe now, and the Czech Republic has shut schools and bars. Dutch cafes and restaurants are closing, and France could impose curfews as European governments fight to keep a second wave of COVID-19 infections under control. France reported a large jump in new cases ahead of the night curfew imposed on Paris and 8 other cities on Saturday, with over 30,600 confirmed infections. Spain's Catalonia region said all restaurants would only be allowed to serve takeaway, while gyms would operate at 50% capacity and shopping centres at 30%. Across Europe, infection rates are rising, with Italy, Poland and Germany all recording their largest daily rise in new cases on Thursday. In the Czech Republic, which currently has the highest infection rate in Europe, cases have nearly doubled in October to reach a total of 139,290. Russia recorded its highest number of daily fatalities since the start of the pandemic, with 286 people reported to have died from COVID-19. In Argentina, thousands have joined anti-government protests as confirmed coronavirus infections continue to rise, closing in on 1 million cases. Many Argentines are angry at the government's handling of the crisis and the economic effect of lockdowns, as well as issues such as corruption. A strict lockdown early in the pandemic meant that the number of cases grew slowly at first. But following an easing of restrictions, cases have been rising steeply. As of Thursday, Argentina has over 950,000 confirmed cases, making it the country with the 6th highest number of infections. More than 25,000 people have died from COVID-19 in the South American nation. Health officials say there has been a steep increase in infections in large cities in the interior of the country. Protests were held in the capitals, Buenos Aires, and other major cities, with varied grievances, including opposition to reform of the justice system and calls for corruption cases to be investigated. But many also said they were opposed to the government's handling of the pandemic, in particular the effects of lockdowns, which have further hurt Argentina's already ailing economy. To some health news, and Johnson & Johnson has paused its COVID-19 vaccine trial to investigate why one participant in the study has fallen ill. The company said an independent review would check if the person's unexplained symptoms were related to the jab. It has also suspended recruitment to the Phase 3 trial as a precaution. For privacy reasons, no further details were given about the participant. In a statement, the company said, "We're also learning more about these participants' illnesses, and it's important to have all the facts before we share additional information." In large trials with tens of thousands of volunteers, instances of participants becoming unwell during the study period were not uncommon. It is not the first COVID-19 vaccine trial to be suspended. A participant in the UK's Oxford University study had an unexplained illness too. It has since been deemed safe to resume, except for in the US, where regulators are still in discussions with manufacturer AstraZeneca. There are nearly 180 vaccine candidates being tested around the world, but none has yet completed clinical trials. The Johnson & Johnson jab, like the Oxford University AstraZeneca one, is in the advanced stage of testing. Both use a modified common cold virus to prime the immune system against COVID-19. Johnson & Johnson has started recruiting patients in the last September with a goal of enrolling up to 60,000 volunteers across more than 200 sites in the US, as well as in South America and South Africa. And in sport, New Zealand will not play England at Wembley in an international friendly next month because of travel and player availability complications. England were due to host the All Whites on November 12th, but New Zealand football say the game could potentially jeopardise their players' careers. The NZF said a number of the team would be subject to quarantine or restrictions on their return home. This would heavily disrupt their domestic seasons. The shifting nature of travel restrictions and commercial flight availability under COVID-19 means that we do not have, nor could we assemble a squad at Wembley. New Zealand have not played an international match since their friendly defeat by Lithuania late November. Subsequent friendlies against Oman and Bahrain, scheduled for March this year, were cancelled because of restrictions amid the COVID-19 pandemic. And that's all for CYC News. A reminder that you can watch this news bulletin again throughout the week on YouTube. I'm Monica Solomon from the CYC studios in Sydney, Australia. See you next time.